Study Section 2. Principles and Practice, Federal Constitutions and Federal Governments. Introduction. Let us quickly review what a federal constitution is and what a federal government is in order to establish differences and similarities in practice. After you have studied this section, you should be able to 1. Describe a federal constitution. 2. Discuss what a federal government is. Federal constitutions. The Constitution of the United States itself, as originally drawn up, contained at least one exception to the federal principle in that the Senate was composed of representatives selected by the legislatures of the states. Thus, a part of the general government of the United States was dependent to some extent upon a part of the regional governments. This exception to the federal principle was maintained in law up to 1913, yet the American Constitution from 1787 to 1913 was and must be called a federal constitution. The Swiss Constitution of 1883 follows the American Constitution in many respects. In two matters, it contains a modification in the strict applications of the federal principles. This admittedly creates a small degree of dependence, particularly as in some cases the cantonal representatives are elected by the cantonal council themselves. In the United States or Australia, an attempt is made to prevent this by allowing the courts, when so invited, to declare that laws which are beyond the powers of the general or regional legislatures are void. We must admit that there is an omission in the Swiss Constitution so far as the machinery for giving effect to the application of the federal principles is concerned. Does the difference between the Swiss Constitution and those of the United States and Australia require us to say that the Swiss Constitution is not federal? I do not think so. We must admit that there is an omission in the Swiss Constitution so far as the machinery for giving effect to the application of the federal principle is concerned. Supremacy of the Constitution. That it should be regulated by a written constitution. I think it is more accurate to say that if a government is to be federal, its constitution, whether it is written or unwritten, or partly written and partly unwritten, must be supreme. So far as this agreement regulates their relations with each other, it must be supreme. It is easy to see how the necessity for a supreme constitution in a federal government leads to the assertion of the necessity for a written constitution also. It is easy to see how the necessity for a supreme constitution in a federal government leads to the assertion of the necessity for a written constitution also. So far as the supremacy of the constitution is concerned, it is interesting to notice how far this principle has been applied in the different cases. So far as the supremacy of the constitution is concerned, it is interesting to notice how far this principle has been applied in the different cases. So far as the supremacy of the constitution is concerned, it is interesting to notice how far this principle has been applied in the different cases. This constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in portions thereof, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. The fact is that Canada is politically federal and that no Dominion government which attempted to stress the unitary elements in the Canadian Constitution at the expense of the federal elements would survive. What matters just as much is the practice of government. A country may have a federal constitution, but in practice it may work the constitution in such a way that its government is not federal. Or a country with a non-federal constitution may work it in such a way that it provides an example of federal government. The experience of Canada has illustrated this. Its constitution is, as a matter of law, not completely federal. It is quasi-federal, but its constitution in practice, its system of government, is federal predominantly. For the students of the working of federal government, it is obvious that the practice of the constitution is more important almost than the law of the constitution. It is usually convenient to begin with the law as a basis of classification, but before a country with a federal constitution can be regarded as providing an example of federal government, the practice of the constitution must be discovered. I regard the United States, Switzerland, and Australia as examples of countries with federal constitutions and federal governments. Study section summary. In this study section, we describe a federal constitution as constitution established for the whole country, which within its sphere is enabled to exercise powers independently of the government of the states, while the latter within its sphere are authorized to act independently of the government of the whole country. Neither state nor federal government acting alone could alter the scope of the other's power as laid down in the Constitution. A federal constitution must appear to be federal in practice, to be called federal government, through strict application of federal principles. Hence, there are cases of countries which have either federal constitution but not federal governments, or quasi-federal constitutions but not federal governments, or constitutions and governments which are not federal at all. End of study section 2. Thank you for listening.